Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay, so um, my notes are a little all over the place. As you can see, today's video is about the movie Lars and the Real Girl. I watched it, I liked it, and I wanted to make a video on it. And it took me a minute to do it, but I kept telling myself to do it, and then I thought now was the perfect time. So, in honor of Valentine's Day, we're gonna do this video. Um, and I'm a little nervous about it. I don't know why, but yeah. So I rewatched the movie last night. I did some notes. Let me fix my posture. I did some notes, and then yeah, let's get into it. So if you guys have seen Lars and the Real Girl, then great. If you have not seen it, it's on Tubi for free. I do my best to find movies that are already free, like when I did The Swan Queen. I think that's what it's called, The Swan Queen. Um, it was free at the time, but now when I look for it, it's not free. But Lars and the Real Girl is free right now, and the next movie is also. So we're gonna get into that. So this one, Lars and the Real Girl, I chose loner movies, and yeah. So we're gonna get into it, and then you guys are kind of gonna understand where I'm coming from on it, hopefully. So yeah, let's get into it. So the movie starts off with Lars, the main character. He's looking out the window and he's covering his mouth with a blanket. And here we talk about what do things represent, the energy of things, right? And what is the energy of a blanket? It keeps you warm, and it's a form of protection against a cold environment, right? And okay, and then so we see him by himself, living by himself, and he's looking at a woman who is his brother's wife, and she's pregnant, so she's about to be his baby mother as well. Um, and she invites him over for dinner, and I believe he said yes, but he didn't want to say yes. Okay, then he goes to church, and there's a woman that he also works with. We find out later on it's his coworker, but they go to the same church, and she's eyeing him because he's being like playful and innocent and authentic in at church. He's at church, and we see someone eyeing him, and then he's talking to an old lady, but he's not really comfortable yet. And so we see that again. We see it with his brother's wife. He's not really comfortable. And then we see him with the old lady. He's not really comfortable. And the old lady is also being nice, and she is asking about his love life. He's pretty quiet. And then he gives her a flower, and then the girl who was eyeing him at church is standing there, and I think she's kind of hoping he gives her the flower. He doesn't. He literally throws but that's also like authentic. That's kind of how he was feeling. He like threw the flower, and then I think he goes home, and then I'm not gonna say what happened next because I'm not too sure. But now it's nighttime. He's sitting alone, and the idea that I got was that he was like sitting alone at night, or he woke up really early, or he didn't go to sleep at all, and he's just in his room. And the next scene is we see his brother's wife enjoying a warm cup of coffee. Okay, so when he first talked to the wife in the first scene, he had a blanket, and he was also covering his mouth with it. So cold energy is feminine energy, right? And he's finding protection with that because he keeps that blanket with him throughout the whole movie. The wife, she seems very healthy with her energy, I guess. And so she's enjoying the warm cup of coffee in a relaxed way. Warmth energy is masculine, okay? So for her, it's like comforting and like she's relaxed in that way. And then I believe he goes to work that day. So we see him kind of like up all night or didn't go to sleep or something, but then he goes to work. And then the receptionist is being really nice. She asks him about his weekend and she seems very genuine. Um, but but then when she asked him about his weekend, he was kind of like surprised. And then she brings up, I think, the girl that had a crush on him at church because they all work together. So I don't know if she's like talked to her about him and stuff like that. But then he's kind of like, and then he goes to work. So it's like he didn't want to talk about his love life, right? Same with the elderly lady after church. He didn't talk about his love life. I don't know if he wanted to or didn't want to, but he didn't talk about it, right? He didn't say what it was. He just said what it wasn't. When she was like, "Oh, are you gay?" He said he wasn't, and that was that. But he didn't say what it was. So then, okay, so then he goes into work, and I think the first thing we see is the receptionist, and he goes into his office and he shares a cubicle with another male coworker. And the first thing he says is, I think I wrote this down. The first thing he said was that he's not really in the mood for looking at porn this morning. He said, "I'm not really in the mood for porn this morning," to the male coworker when he was getting his attention. And so what I wrote down was that maybe like he was used to that, and maybe we don't know because we didn't see anything before that of them interacting. So maybe they had done that together at work before, or maybe that was like his first time saying like, "I'm not really in the mood for that." Maybe he was starting that transition right there, I think. And then the other thing I noticed in that specific scene was that the male coworker had a bunch of little like action figures around his office, which I've noticed is very common with like men who are lonely. Um, and I lived with a man like that, so he had action figures like that too, and he was, in my opinion, very lonely. And he got like he had like feminine energy here and there, but overall, yeah, right. So maybe I'm gonna circle back around, I think, on that one. Okay, so that's what I noticed about the male coworker, right? He looks at porn. He has action figures, and then he was looking at a doll online. And then the girl coworker comes up, and she's being like her. It seemed like authentic self, but they treated her like she was annoying, right? And the thing is, he the male coworker seems to like look at feminine stuff all day, right? Like the guy goes into work, he already knew he was looking at something like that, right? And he said he wasn't in the mood. Lars said he wasn't in the mood. So if the male coworker is like spending his time looking at feminine things, but they're not real, um, like even people who like do porn and stuff like that, a lot of it is like made a certain way, and I don't know if it's authentic to what extent because there's so much that goes on in that industry and it has been like that for decades. And some people really are into it, and it's like there is a level of realness and it's that, but not totally, I think. So when the female woman coworker comes in, and they treated her like she was annoying, and then the male coworker said to her about Lars was that maybe she was coming on too strong, right? But she was coming off kind of bubbly, you know what I mean, and playful throughout the whole movie, and kind. Um, And then he goes home, and then that when it comes to the time to go to the dinner that the brother's wife invited him to. And in the scene before that, when they were at work, and the girl coworker goes to their desk, and she was kind of making a bit of a move on Lars, or she showed interest for the second time. The male coworker, when Lars got uncomfortable and he left to go get the coffee, the male coworker told her, maybe you're coming off a little bit too strong, right? So in the next scene, when he's home after work that day, and he goes home, the brother's wife, I think she was coming off aggressive. I didn't write down exactly what happened, but she was coming off a little bit aggressive about him going to dinner because she was worried about him, right? And she seems to be in a healthy marriage throughout the movie, so um, that says something, right? And and then Lars ends up going to the dinner, and I wrote something down, but I don't think it's as important right now. This is from the first time I watched it. This is from the second time I watched it, so I'm not going to say all the notes from the first time I saw the video because I don't feel it's as important right now anymore. But so now he's at the dinner, and the wife is like, um, picking up the plates, washing the dishes, I guess, but giving the brothers a chance to talk. And then they talk about their dad, and the older brother, who's married, said something about their dad, and then he was like, "Oh, you're kind of like our dad. Like you're kind of like alone and isolated." And then Lars was like, "Well, no, I'm not like dad," because he wanted to be alone. So then that's another clue we see that, oh, he doesn't want to be alone. And then the older brother goes, "That's not true. He was kind of like basically saying, I feel like, that he wasn't really like a lonely guy and he was happy in a relationship. And then after their mother passed away, their dad's wife, then he got like that." Okay. So now it's like he got a change in perspective, kind of. He got a new perspective. We see him and his brother. There was some distance there growing up at some point, or who knows if it would, like, how long it was. Um, and then I think as he's leaving, going back to his place, the brother's wife, she talks to Lars about his mom and the blanket that he carries around with him, which is a blanket that the mom made him, okay, before she passed. And um, when you make someone something, it's an act of labor. It's kind of like love, you know what I mean? And it's a blanket. So, and the brother's wife is pregnant right now. So she's having her first child. So I think that motherly energy is like coming through from her. And she's basically saying, or she said that, oh, that it was like a nice blanket and she must have really loved you. So that's a gentle, like, reassurance nudge, right? So she must have really loved you, right? So maybe that was a change in perspective in him too. Maybe he had like a certain idea of things. Who knows? And you know, and it seems like she's being kind, not judgmental or overly fearful about his loneliness. Just kind of like a little like a warm like a reassurance thing. So then he goes. I don't think he goes to work, but I think before he left that dinner, she asked. She felt like he was like mad at her, right? So after that, like she felt like he was mad at her, but she didn't understand why. And maybe it goes. The way you treat one thing is the way you treat everything. So maybe that has something to do with that. Then we see that he buys the fake doll that the coworker was looking at in the first scene when he goes into work. He actually bought the fake doll. So he buys her, and I think she gets there. And then, okay, so when the dog gets there, he gets all nice and dressed up, and he's like happy about it. But he goes to his brother's and his wife's place, and his brother answers the door, and he's kind of waiting for the wife. And then he tells the wife, that he has a visitor. Oh, it's a girl he met online. Oh, and then he tells a little bit more. But it's like, honestly, when he said he met a girl and he has a visitor, the energy was like non-judgmental. Not like, oh, you have a visitor? Oh, you never have visitors, The energy was like, oh, really? It's open, right? And then it was like, oh, but he didn't feel, or for some reason, oh, he was putting it on her. He was saying that she has a certain religion or something like that, but she couldn't spend the night at his place or something like that. And then him and the wife and the brother and his wife were like, oh, well, she could just stay with us, So like, and then when he was like, oh, we met online, they were both like, oh, people do that all the time nowadays. You know what I mean? Like they were just like non-judgmental, non-judgmental, non-judgmental. When they could have responded a different way, and he would have just gone back to how he was being before, and he would have put the doll in the box, and he would have just called it a day probably. And so the way you respond to people matters, right? And so he had a little bit of a fire, a little bit of a passion, and they didn't put it out and feel powerful, right? That's fake power. That's just comparing someone else who is down in the dumps and, oh, at least you're not there. They weren't doing that. They were nurturing the little fire within him. Um, so, yeah. Um, and then when they, okay. Okay, so then they're at dinner, and then now Lars is a little bit more talkative, and the people around him are a little bit more quiet, right? So now his brother and his brother's wife are kind of more at loss for words, when at first it was everyone else talking, and then he was kind of quiet. So the tables have turned, you know what I mean? Like you can turn the tables whenever you want, you know what I mean? And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's how you see it and um, how you respond to energy. So now he's kind of like, it feels like he's kind of taking control, and they're being receptive to it, like, yeah, yeah, but they're just a little shocked, a little quiet. And then now he's talking about his feelings, you know what I mean? But it's not too direct. He's saying that, oh, well, Bianca, the doll, Bianca, she came from the airport, her luggage was stolen. So that makes me angry. You know what I mean? And then he asks Karen, if the brother's wife, if she was willing to lend him some clothes. And she kind of made a few excuses, but then he was like, oh, no, she doesn't mind, or this or whatever. So they let her borrow the clothes. And then they said that she could stay in the pink room, right? Pink room is another like feminine thing. So his girl's staying in a room that's even like feminine. So he's comfortable with a feminine energy, right? That is feminine. Sometimes people want a woman, but they don't really want her to be feminine for whatever reason. You know what I mean? Sometimes people want a man, but they don't want him to be feminine. I mean, masculine, right? So yeah. So then they let the doll stay in the room. They're out. Lars is going back to his place. Dinner's over, and then the wife, the brother's wife, she um, says, "Oh, your brother was saying that maybe we should take the doll to the doctors, you know, just to make sure like she's okay because she was in a wheelchair, right? She needed a wheelchair. So I feel like I wrote this down. I don't know. I didn't. I didn't. Okay, so then the wife comes up with the idea, I'm assuming, but she says, "Oh, your brother was thinking, you know, maybe we should let her see a doctor, this and that." But they were kind of saying maybe, you know, for Lars, you know what I mean? So she was doing the same thing that Lars was doing, right? Like, um, like when he was saying, "Oh, Bianca this, Bianca that, Bianca that," but maybe he was talking about himself, and we see that throughout the movie, kind of. So she kind of did the same thing. You know, she's pretty smart to me because that was very kind of like not so direct, right? Um, it's kind of walking sideways like a crab, which cancers do, right? And then the wife and the husband are in bed, and he's saying that he's gonna need to see a shrink. He's not gonna need to see the family doctor because he's gonna need to see like a shrink, like someone who's a professional at this stuff, right? But what does the word shrink mean? The word shrink is to make something smaller, maybe even to a point to where you can't even see it anymore. But just because something is so small that you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean it's not going to grow like a seed. Doesn't mean it's not going to grow when you're not looking, right? So a shrink, you know what I mean? And then the husband's wife said, "Well, yeah, you know, like she does that. She's also a psychologist, right? Which is a different word, right? Psychologist sounds a little bit more professional, we'll say, for the way that we're seeing things right now." And then we also see her wearing snowflake pajamas, which is, you know, like I said, cold energy is feminine energy. I think I wrote notes for myself too. Yeah. And you know, the brother was still expressing worry, and then the wife said that the doctor said that, you know, that it's okay because you have to be this far north sometimes, right? Like the North Pole, cold, and you know, like just this far gone sometimes, you know, and that it's okay. Um, which is, you know, some people are afraid of emotion, and you know they feel like they go too far, but he's not like raging really, like it's not like scary, so he's expressing emotion. And for sometimes men especially, and women, but for people who are more in their masculine, they may not be that comfortable, so when someone's expressing some sort of little emotion, they're just like whoa whoa, and they're actually the more dramatic one in the moment, and not letting that other person express and just like do the thing. So then they make it to the first doctor's visit. Again, the husband and the wife are pretty quiet. The wife tries speaking a little bit, you know, just like playing, trying to make it more comfortable. The husband is a little bit more uncomfortable still, you know, then she gets quiet again, and um, not a big deal. It wasn't like, you know, abusive or anything, but, you know, she just gets quiet again. They're at the doctor's, they're waiting. Everyone's pretty quiet. I think Lars is speaking still, so now he's like more comfortable talking. And now it's like he's doing the thing in that way. So the tables have turned. And then now Lars is talking to the doctor about Bianca, the doll. And then he said something about like she asked me not to be sad, but I can't help it. And I don't know what he was referring to, but I think that maybe that's significant and that's gonna come around again. So he said she asked me not to be sad, but I can't help it. Okay. And the doctor is being very kind, and instead of being oppositional to him, you're wrong or whatever, she's standing side by side holding hands, right? And she's playing along with the act, right? When the play's over, what do all the cast members do? They stand side by side and they hold hands, and they take a bow to the crowd. Thank you. So I know I'm sounding a little crazy probably to some people because I'm like all over the place with my notes, but hopefully it comes together, okay? So then, okay, so in the scene when the husband and the wife are in bed before they go to the first doctor's visit, the brother of Lars, um, he's telling the wife, like, what will people think? And then she said, we can't worry about that. You know what I mean? Like they have to be there for him, is what I'm assuming she's showing. So the brother cares about what the outside world is thinking, right? We see that. So he's like, what would they think? And when she says we can't worry about that right now, that's kind of cold, right? It seems kind of cold when it's like, well, we can't worry about that, which is feminine energy, right? And then the brother even wants to send Lars away at some point, right? Like, I think before the first doctor's visit, he even brought up something about sending him away, like just make him go away, make the problem go away. Just like we said earlier about him bringing up he needs to see a shrink, shrinking the problem so it goes away. But shrinking something, it still exists, and if it shrinks down even to the size of a mustard seed, it can grow, right? And it can grow big. So he's being kind of avoidant there. And then in the first doctor's visit, after the doctor talked to Lars, and we see her standing side by side, not oppositional to him, and even, well, we'll talk about that in another video. But we see her, side by side holding hands, like, I support this guy. Now it's the husband and the wife talking by themselves with the doctor, and then he's kind of doing the same thing again right there, right? And he's saying, so in the first scene, he did that, and then he did that here with the doctor, and he said everyone's gonna laugh at him, and the doctor is doing the same thing with him, which is he's kind of acting like a child, and she's acting motherly, where she's standing side by side, but kind of a little kind of, I want to say, oppositional, but in a funny, light-hearted kind of a way. And so when he said everyone's gonna laugh at him, the doctor goes, and you too, right? Because that's why he's really scared, right? But it wasn't like, ouch, you know what I mean? It was just like, it just kind of reminded me of something like a real true mother would say, and that was a nice thing. So I think when they're in the waiting room before this, he said that Bianca loves kids, and he doesn't have kids of his own, but sometimes when you don't have kids of your own, people do assume, oh, you don't want kids, you don't like kids, Just like they assumed the older lady, oh, are you gay? You know what I mean? People make a lot of assumptions, and they can hurt. And so maybe him speaking for himself through Bianca, like he loves kids, you know what I mean? Um, And when he's at church in the first scene, he's playing kind of with the kid, but it's also not too direct because the kid's not really like paying attention. Um, Okay. So again with the doctor, Karen is saying, "How can we help?" And the doctor says, "Just go along with it." Okay, like a play, just go along with it. Because guess what? There is an audience. So yeah, I'm kind of trying to skip over the notes. I don't feel like there's necessary. And okay, so then it's breakfast, and Lars is having breakfast with them, which before he didn't really feel as comfortable eating with them or being around people, but with Bianca there, he was starting to be more like open and like with people. So when he had breakfast, we didn't see any uncomfortability with that. We just see the next scene he's having breakfast with his brother and his wife, his brother's wife. And then he said something before he left to work that Bianca said that's why God made her to help people. And I think Lars is starting to realize his life purpose. And, maybe he thinks that's why he was born to help people, right? Which who knows if that was a question he's had in his mind for how long, right? Why was he born, maybe? Some people do think that. Um, and then he leaves for work. And then the brother is still kind of like, not really comfortable, really, with it, the way his brother's going about his healing, right? So when Lars leaves for work, the husband says to his wife, "This is not my fault." And then he said it again, "This is not my fault." He said it twice. But we don't really ever see the wife telling him, "Oh, this is your fault. This is why he's like this," right? We don't ever see that. So it's kind of like an internal um, thing that's going on with him that he feels like it's his fault. And then Lars, I guess, wears his blanket to work. Oh, wait, hold on. And then he goes into work, that second time we see him go into work. And then Cindy, the receptionist, he acknowledges her and he goes, "Good morning, Cindy. You look really pretty." And then Cindy gives him a card and she goes, "You know how much I love these things." She seems like expressive, right? Um, and then I guess the office guy. Oh, I guess the girl in the office, her name was, I'll find her name, but she, the girl in the office girl that has a crush on him, I think she asked him if he was going to go to Cindy's party. And, oh, Margot. Her name's Margot. So, Margot, the girl in the office that has a crush on Lars, asks Lars if he's going to go to Cindy's party, which is the receptionist. And he's kind of like, I don't know. And then he was like, "Wait, yeah, I'm going to bring someone though." And then she goes, "Okay, yeah, it's fine. I'm going to bring someone too." And I think he like pauses and he's like, "Wait." You know what I mean? Like, when someone's like showing you attention and then there's a change. You know what I mean? Maybe they give someone else attention or something else is going on, and then you're kind of like, "Wait, what?" You know? So I think he had a moment like that, and then I think what happened next in this scene was that we see that the office guy gets emotional because Cindy took his possessions, right? Which is the little dolls. So ooh, we're gonna get into this in a little bit, okay? Um, Towards the end, I think. That's coming up. We're like halfway. So then I think that there's a town meeting about Lars and him having this doll and carrying it around town and the way he's responding. So then they're kind of like pointing at him, pointing at him, pointing at him, like oppositional. And then the old lady that was at church in the beginning, she's like, "Well, your wife was a klepto. Like she got buried in my earrings." And then she was like, and you this and you that, and she was like calling everyone out, like basically saying like everyone has like their little things that make them maybe like, you could say, if we want to point the finger, that you're crazy, right? And then they all kind of stay quiet, I feel like, and then they look at the pastor, and then they were like, the pastor said, I think they were like, well, what if he wants to take her to church? You know what I mean? And she's a sex doll, so what what the pastor said was, what would Jesus do? And they stayed quiet. And we know what Jesus would do, because Jesus was cool with the prostitutes, and he was cool with, all these other people who you could point the finger and judge, but you could point the finger back, right? And turn them tables, right? Um, so I guess I'm trying to stay on track. Okay. So 27, 24, 27. Okay. So now we see Lars, and he's taking the doll Bianca to a lake. And he tells his brother, I thought we would take her to the lake where we used to play. And the brother's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's nice. Now, the lake, water represents emotion, okay? And a lake, not an ocean, not a river, a lake, represents, apparently, according to Google, a stream of consciousness. So like now the consciousness is like flowing. It's like not like stuck. It's a stream of consciousness, and it's just like flowing and natural. And and okay, so he told that to the brother, Gus, before he goes, and then he thought, oh yeah, that was nice. You could see that on his expression. But when he actually gets to the lake with Bianca, he's telling Bianca all these memories, not of him and his brother going to the lake, but of his brother and his friends going to the lake. Like, oh, every year, during the winter they would play hockey, and during the summer they used to go fishing, and like they da 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 da. So he knew this pattern. So this pattern may have gone on for years, right? So years of loneliness, years of his brother abandoning him, not just even before his wife, but um, I don't really like to say the word abandoning, but I'm assuming, just for the theme, it's kind of the best word I can use to describe. Um, so his brother would do all those things with his friends, not with Lars, right? So how long has he been kind of like lonely, And instead of his brother standing side by side, he kind of like didn't do that. So then now Lars is at the doctor's for the second time. This time without his brother and his brother's wife. And he sees that the doctor understands, and we see that the doctor understands loneliness and grief, because he's looking at her stuff, and he asks about something, and I think someone passed away in her life, and I think it was her husband. So then, it seemed like Lars did get happy about that little connection, like, oh, you had someone pass away too, right? And then, I think we're still at the hospital at this point, and then Dr. Lars is mentioning something about hugs that they burn, and he said like when your feet freeze, right? Um, and they warm up. He's warming up. Not used to that. I'm not sure if he said hugs burn like when your feet freeze. So we're gonna move on from that because I don't want to get too into that if that's not actually what he said. but I guess the neck area is where it hurts the most. And when the doctor was like, well, let me feel here, and then she gets to the neck, and that's where it hurts the most. And maybe our throat chakra helps us communicate. So maybe something around communicating, it feels like it hurts. And sometimes, oh yeah. So then, so then we see his older brother Gus talking to his male coworkers who, when you grow up, your coworkers in general kind of sometimes are like your friends. Um, and so they're kind of like having a laugh, the other guys, not Lars's brother. They're asking like, "Oh, what's the difference between a illusion and a delusion?" And we see that Gus is still embarrassed, and maybe I wrote a note that maybe, when they were growing up, maybe that's why he didn't invite Lars with his friends to go fishing and um, make castles and forts and stuff like that. Maybe he didn't invite him because he didn't want to get made fun of, or maybe he didn't want his brother to get made fun of. Um, right? But now he's dealing with it, right? You can only make something go away, or like ignorance is bliss until it's not. That's something I say a lot. I used to live in ignorance is bliss, but you know, things grow, and then eventually you have to deal with them. And sometimes they go away by themselves once you like just look at it. But I also wrote down that maybe his friends wouldn't have even minded having Gus around. Maybe he would have been like the weird, quiet, awkward, shy guy. But, sometimes people don't mind. And they would have still been like funny and making jokes. But, eventually those jokes get tired out and they were still probably would have been like funny, cool guys. Um, so, yeah, it probably wouldn't have been a big deal, I think. When you let things play out. So maybe he should have let that play out. And then next scene we see his brother and his brother's wife bathing Bianca. And Gus is like, what are we doing this for him? Like, why are we doing this for him? You know what I mean? And then she goes, come on, it's funny. And then he basically says that it's not. And then she just gets frustrated and she leaves, right? So, the brother asks, why are we doing this for him? You know what I mean? So maybe, I think that said a lot. I don't even know how to say it myself. Like, why are we doing this for him? And it's just like, I think we all do that sometimes. We act like certain things for people is not important, and like playing pretend is not important sometimes. We ignore people's something. Like, I don't know. So, in the next scene, Lars is with the doctor in that office. But it was like in the scene before that when I said they were talking about grief and loneliness, it was still the same doctor's visit. It just went to the scene like what is the wife and the husband doing, and they were bathing Bianca, and then it goes back to the scene with the doctor's visit, that same doctor's visit. And Gus is realizing his part in abandoning his brother. So it was like I think Lars maybe felt first that the mother abandoned him, and then when the dad got sad, the dad abandoned him. Um, and then the brother, because he says later about that, then the brother abandoned him, right? So he was kind of like left alone. And the brother is saying that how he left his little brother, and now he lives in a garage like the family dog, and he ordered a girl from a box, and he's like blaming himself for all that. And I think they're back in the office, and Lars is probably seeing Margot with her new man, and they're being kind of, she's being kind of like laughing and stuff, how she normally is, and I see that I think Lars gets a little jealous, and I'm kind of like confused because I keep writing stuff about the doctor, so I don't know if I wrote that before or after. But I guess Lars is back at the doctor's, and he said that I don't know if he said that he's scared to. He didn't say he was scared to have kids, but he shows that he was kind of scared to have kids, and I think he was crying. And the doctor was saying that she can't have kids, so it was kind of again like she was standing side by side with him. And there's even more commonality, not just with grief and loneliness, but not having someone outside of yourself to nurture. You know what I mean? Um, and then everyone loves Bianca. And then Gus is opening up to his wife about like maybe it's his fault. And then his wife says, "Come here," and they cuddle. So he's comfortable with the feminine touch and the feminine energy because he had that from his mom longer. You know what I mean? So Gus did get to experience a few years with his mom, and the way that he responds to the feminine energy is nice. It's healthy, and he's comfortable with it. So I think that does say a lot about his mom. So, um, you know, and then I guess Lars is starting to give Margot a little bit more attention, and now everyone's kind of hanging out with Bianca, and they change her appearance, and then he gets upset, and then it's about he says something about Scrabble. Oh, we were supposed to play Scrabble. So Scrabble, I guess, is like a play on words, right? So I guess like they're kind of messing up like his control because he did gain control, and he was like telling people like, "Oh, Bianca this, Bianca that." Now Bianca's becoming her own human, her own person, and she got a haircut, and now he's kind of like, "Whoa, whoa, what's going on?" So that play on words that he was doing, and he said that me and Bianca were supposed to play Scrabble. What is this? Now other people are adding on their words to Bianca. Oh, well, she got a haircut. Oh, she went to the salon. You know what I mean? And he's upset because, yeah. And then, wow, we're getting to the end. Yeah. Okay, so then, they did give her a haircut, and then now Bianca's going with the elderly lady from the beginning. I forgot her name. Hopefully, I wrote it down somewhere. Um, she takes Bianca to volunteer to help. And I think that Bianca had already done that before in this movie, but he was just like thrown off from the haircut and whatever, so he was upset, and he was yelling at Bianca. They didn't like that, and then she goes, she needs to have her own life, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're at work, you do this, you do that. She can't just like not do anything and like stay at home. You know what I mean? You should be proud of her for volunteering and helping people, right? Which is, um, you know. And then so when she leaves to volunteer with the older lady, he kind of feels abandoned and like no one cares. And let me start another video just to make sure this saves.